Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Saturday morning, Shane Beamer, the South Carolina Gamecocks, landing another commitment coming out of the transfer portal as former Bowling Green defensive lineman Davonte Miles committing to South Carolina. Now, I'll be the first one to just put my hand up and say we're a little delayed in getting this commitment episode out. I had to go watch a little Davonte Miles. I don't spend a ton of my Saturdays watching Bowling Green football. Went back and watched him, and I'll prerequisite the conversation with this. Coach Robertson, he's a hell of a lot smarter than I am. And, if he sees something in Davonte Miles, I'm going to 100% back it up. Now, when you turn on the film, I think the thing you like here, he's 6'4", he's 280 pounds, and he has some nice length and athleticism. Like, there are some things there that flash. The biggest question here for me is the physicality going into the SEC. I mean, at 280 pounds, you can tell that frame is slight. And I think my biggest concern is like he's going into year 4. He was 275 pounds coming out of high school. And so why hasn't that weight come on to kind of be a full-sized interior defensive lineman is probably the question that I have right off the bat. Now, South Carolina's done a really good job putting weight on its guys. I mean, you talk about Josiah Thompson. If he was going to start as a true freshman, he had to put on some weight relatively quickly, and he did so. And so I'm not saying this South Carolina program can't get this kid in the weight room and get him up to around 300 pounds because he's got the frame to do it. I mean, he's 6'4" and a half, 6'5". There's plenty of frame for him to add some mass. I'm just concerned why that mass hasn't been added. And I think it's a funny conversation because I'm a Michigan fan. I remember Michigan going after Davonte Miles as this developmental defensive lineman coming out of the 2022 class. Now, I think why South Carolina goes to Davonte Miles here is, look, we just need bodies on the inside. That's one of those positions here. You want good football players, but you got to be deep. And for Davonte Miles, do I think he's going to come in and start for South Carolina? No. Do I think he's going to come in and be an all SEC guy? No. But I do think he could come in and maybe give you 10 to 15 really good snaps a game. And you talk about keeping your defensive lineman fresh for 4 quarters, 12 plus games of a season. It's not a flashy talking point, but it's a really important one. That's probably what you get with the addition of Davonte Miles. And he's got 2 years of eligibility. Again, he's got some intriguing length and athleticism that flashes. What can you do with the development? That's probably the big storyline. But at the end of the day, you're getting another big body on the inside of the defensive line, which is a massive priority for South Carolina. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about Davonte Miles. I want to talk about what this defensive line rotation is going to be. Take a look at what South Carolina has done, and maybe that position they'd like to add, whether it's at the end of this portal window or in the spring transfer portal window. Before we get into it, as always, I do want to give a massive shout out to the South Carolina fans. We have been breaking down every single commitment for this program in the transfer portal. We've been talking a lot about this team at the end of 2024, and the amount of support y'all continue to show to the fellas has been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into Davonte Miles. And again, Coach Robertson, he's smarter than me. And if he sees something in this kid, I'm going to back it up. Now, you look at Davonte Miles, again, the biggest question mark here is he wasn't all that physically imposing on the film in the MAC at Bowling Green. So my biggest concern is, can you hold up from a physicality standpoint in the SEC for South Carolina in the 2025 year? Now, the things you like, again, length, athleticism, and also a little bit of versatility. Like, you see him play a lot of different positions on the defensive line, which is always a good thing to have on your defensive line, especially with South Carolina that, at times will give you different looks in the front. Do I think he's a guy that's a reliable plug-and-play dude? That's kind of what you're going to find out. And I think South Carolina's put them in a spot where, there's a couple of positions, I'd say probably wide receiver, I'd probably say linebacker, and I'd probably say on the inside of the defensive line where you're going into spring practice with some potential answers, right? I like the freshman class that's coming in at the wide receiver position. I think's one of the better wide receiver classes that South Carolina has signed in a really long time. You have Nick Harbor going into year 3. You have Bennett going into year two. Yeah, I think on the surface, you're like, hey, maybe we want to add some more wide receivers. Well, I think South Carolina's perspective is, hey, let's rock with the guys that we have in spring practice. And if we have to go into the portal and add one more wide receiver, we can do that in the spring portal window. But we're not going to get into bidding wars for guys like KC Concepcion because we think we have some really good wide receivers in our room. I think you say the same thing for the linebacker room. Now you add a guy like Sean Murphy, who is athletic. You like the athletic upside, but hasn't played a ton. Very similar conversation for Justin Okoronkwo, who I am a massive fan of. And talk about Wendell Gregory or Fred Johnson. You got some potential answers at linebacker, and although none of them are proven commodities yet at the college football landscape, there's a really good chance 2 or 3 of those guys emerge as starting caliber dudes. Now, on the inside of the defensive line, this is probably my biggest concern. Now, you look at what South Carolina has done. I think a big storyline, arguably the biggest storyline for South Carolina in spring practice is, what does Gabe Brown-Ladindi look like? Look, this kid was a 5-star coming out of high school for a reason. The dripping with physical traits, has struggled with injuries, has struggled with consistently getting on the football field on Saturdays. But there's that chance that this kid becomes a real dude for South Carolina in the 2025 year. Now, another interesting one is Jalen Brown, who Jalen Brown's a guy that, yeah, he's probably projected to play edge, but a guy that has a frame that I think could get up and play on the inside as well. And so, again, and then you add Xavier Hardy, the number one JUCO prospect, who's a good football player. And so you have some potential answers, but you're going into spring practice, and all right, let's see what we get from some of these guys. And if we do have to go in the spring transfer portal window and address another body on the defensive line, you can probably do that. But again, I think South Carolina has put themselves in a position where you're going into spring practice with some potential answers. We're going to get those answers in spring practice. And then the good thing about the transfer portal is you're going to have another opportunity to address some of the positions if you deem you need to over the next couple of months. It's going to be a really exciting spring practice for South Carolina because there's a lot of young talent that you saw start to flash in 2024, but maybe didn't fully emerge, that very well could emerge as difference makers in 2025. And so we're going to be reading the spring practice notes, trying to get a feel for what players are starting to break out. And then we'll kind of circle back to this conversation and say, all right, does South Carolina need to go get another guy on the inside of the defensive line? But the way I look at South Carolina, and it's funny, we just had the conversation last night on the live stream. I think some South Carolina fans are skeptical of the offensive line, which I get. I think it's going to be a really good unit. You added some veteran talent, guys like Nick Sharp and Rodney Newsom, but you also have, a sneaky storyline. Lenore Sellers was grabbing a lot of the storylines in November for South Carolina, and rightfully so. Like Josiah Thompson, left tackle, was playing some really damn good football. And so Josiah Thompson could be a legitimate bona fide stud at left tackle in the 2025 year. I thought Josiah Thompson was going to need a year to develop before he started. There were some growing pains early, but certainly looked really good in the month of November. So what does he look like in 2025, along with a couple other young cats, Trevon Botry, maybe Marky Anderson? We'll see how it plays out. You're adding a body that you needed to add at a position, and that's what the transfer portal is for. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.